Each vault can have one collateral type and has like basically its own slashing rules and its own like sort of delegation strategy. That means like you can use that asset in the vault to stake to multiple networks if those networks accept your restaked stake. So like, let's say you have $100 million in the vault, basically say to the network, hey, I can bring these 100 million in security to your network. I would delegate to these operators. Do you accept my vault, essentially? And then the network says yes. And you can sort of decide which vaults to work with. Ultimately, the core goal of our protocol is to make decentralization easier. Of course, there's going to be a cost to it, but like that should be as low as possible. Symbiotic core protocol is the first step to achieve that.
I'm here with Felix Lutsch, head of ecosystem at Symbiotic. Hey, Felix.
Hi, Seb. Great to chat to you.
Yeah, it's been a while. So a lot of people will know Felix as my co-host of Epicenter, but you've also spent a long time at Chorus One. So definitely in the kind of Epicenter, Chorus, Interop family, I'd say, extended family. But yeah, how's it going? How you been?
Yeah, very good. It's been a very busy time with Symbiotic and Mainnet launch, which we're hopefully going to talk about today a bunch.
Totally.
And like, yeah, it also impacted my Epicenter co-hosting. So I have done many episodes in the past. I hope to like return a bit to that in the coming weeks again, if I find some time. Yeah. But good to be on this side of the table as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Misha was on Epicenter just a couple of months ago, and you were actually on the Interop at Staking Summit in Bangkok. So we did a little episode there. But since then, there's been the mainnet launch, which is exciting, and a lot of stuff happening in the Symbiotic ecosystem. So we're going to dive into that. But just maybe starting off for folks who are maybe not super familiar with Symbiotic or how it's different from other restaking providers as a foundation for this conversation, what is the founding vision for Symbiotic and how has that evolved since inception?
Right. Yeah, I think the core premise we work under is that shared security, I guess is a concept that has been there for a while, and everyone's sort of interested, how can we be more capital efficient and, share the same resources to secure these decentralized networks, and our core premise here is like, how can you remove as much friction and make it as scalable as possible and basically enable decentralization, because ultimately, the core goal of our protocol is to make decentralization easier. And, we've seen a lot of directionally moves into being more centralized in crypto. And so we believe that shared security is kind of the best bet to maintain decentralization. Of course, there's going to be a cost to it, but that should be as low as possible and the friction should be as low as possible. And the sort of bootstrapping cost to build a decentralized network should be as low as possible. So Symbiotic core protocol is the first step to achieve that from our perspective. And yeah, I guess how it differs, I guess that was actually a question. I think there's just a bit more of focus on the flexibility and kind of the modularity of it, as we like this in the crypto space, this word, where there is less of a opinionated top-down approach of, hey, here's how our shared security works, and you have to opt into it, and you become sort of part of this system, and you have to follow our rules, like the parachain auctions and things that were there in before. But rather, hey, you can build your own sort of shared security logic, and you can adjust it and opt into things with other networks if you want to, but you're not forced to. You're still sovereign. We don't control anything, or we don't make any choices for you. So Symbiotic is kind of designed to achieve that.
Right. So Symbiotic, I think one of the things you mentioned here is the permissionless nature, the modular nature, and the ability for protocols using Symbiotic to have a high degree of sovereignty over how they interact with with the security providers, and the high degree of agency around the structure of the network. How much of that comes from the Cosmos app chain thesis, or how much of that is kind of inspired by that philosophy? And it's kind of interesting you mentioned Polkadot, because I think Cosmos and Polkadot have very differentiating views on how a network should be constructed, where one was more sort of centered around this idea of permissionlessness, application sovereignty, etc., where the other was more of a cathedral model where the network structure was a lot more top down. So maybe philosophically, like how much of that is aligned with those initial ideas around application chains with sovereignty?
Yeah, I think it's definitely pretty aligned. I think we're, overall more also thinking about, the Ethereum ecosystem and, what's been built there and trying to, in a way, like how Layer 2s did it for, I guess, like execution environments and having like rollups do the same for staking systems at large, which can also be like part of the rollups. And there's certainly like alignment in the vision there. But I think, you still want to have this liquidity hub or settlement hub on Ethereum. And, that's why the core contracts are also on Ethereum, which basically makes them like as secure as Ethereum because they're also immutable, the core contracts. There's no like additional governance from our side. There's, pure solidity there. So it means like, which a lot of people do, like, right, if you have your token on Ethereum, you can like use it as staking there. You can also use other tokens where there's a lot of liquidity already on Ethereum. And even if you like bootstrap an app chain through Symbiotic staking, even the validators of the app chain couldn't like change things about your token supply because that would still be like kind of managed on Ethereum. So I think that's philosophically where it like diverges a bit, and also like in terms of like just access to liquidity and things, but just in terms of sovereignty and app chains being custom in what they do and just sort of the philosophy. I think that it's very much aligned.
Yeah. So one of the things I think that's interesting also about Symbiotic is that it's multi-asset. So it has this multi-asset approach, and which sets it apart, I think, from other restaking protocols that are single asset approach or have a much more top-down approach to curating the assets that are used for restaking. Like, why do you think this is useful? And do you think that, like, in the end, will there be a long tail of assets that are securing applications on Symbiotic, or will things sort of naturally still concentrate on a small number of assets, ETH, BTC, maybe Solana, and some other like blue chip assets? I guess my question is like, is it worth having like this amount of, sort of complexity to create this open system when in the end, most likely, I think in my view, like only a small number of assets will actually be securing stuff?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think the way we think about it is more that, Symbiotic or the modular stack, I guess overall is also a stack that is more targeted or suited for like a sort of application-centric development and, cycle where like, I guess that's why application-specific chains, it's actually the same direction where essentially the app itself should control or like secure all the infrastructure that it needs to operate, or at least like partially secure. So let's say you are perp DEX and you have your application specific chain and maybe like also the Oracle for that perp DEX, or also the interop between that perp DEX and other systems can be secured with the same sort of assets. And that might be actually the asset or token of this app itself. So in that sense, for within that app, all the infra is secured by their own token, maybe extended by a stake from blue chip assets like ETH and BTC just to, have additional security, or maybe in the early phase of the application where there's no own token yet that has enough value bootstrapped by those assets, but like in a flexible way, right? So maybe, when you become more mature, you kind of can use more your own asset as security. And then I guess if you become big enough and you build your own ecosystem, others can use your asset as well to secure their, if they're on the perp DEX now, it becomes like its own chain, and there's like a lending protocol that also has something to secure that can reuse like the security that's already there for the rest of the system. And it goes in a direction that's like also, I think, been explored in the Cosmos ecosystem with mesh security and so on, where you have like sort of these economic alliances and also security alliance within the system.
And what do you think is the role of Bitcoin here, and how does Symbiotic compete with the likes of Babylon in terms of, say, like I'm not sure what the right term is here, but like the security around the assets, where I think like Babylon, because it's built infrastructure that essentially like utilizes native Bitcoin for restaking, whereas with Symbiotic, you'd have to use some kind of like wrapped Bitcoin, as far as I know, right, to utilize Bitcoin for restaking. So how does Symbiotic compete there on particularly like on ETH or on Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think if you want the staking to happen, I think ultimately right now the Symbiotic contracts are on Ethereum and they're Solidity EVM based, right? And they are, because of the design, it's more flexible in terms of what you can do with the slashing and sort of with the staking system overall, meaning like you have more expressivity and you can build more sophisticated staking and slashing systems. And this is like not possible if you do like Bitcoin native staking. So you're quite limited in terms of what you can actually slash for and like provably like verify on Bitcoin basically. And so like the Babylon staking system like uses the system to essentially leak those keys, and then you can like slash that. But yeah, I guess it can be used to like a very kind of subset of slashing infractions, like double signing, but not much else. So in a way, you know, Symbiotic can help those networks that want to receive Bitcoin security by, like you said, using some wrapped asset that could be provided by different bridging systems in Bitcoin. There's also like IBTC, I guess, is a good example of one of our partners where they have this decentralized custody network for Bitcoin, and the system itself is secured through Symbiotics. Like the bridge actually has like economic security there, and then their IBTC asset can be used in Symbiotic and can be slashed. So it goes through that extra step, but you know, the IBTC system, for example, and there can be others, can still represent Bitcoin security in Symbiotic at large. So we have like a bunch of teams that are interested in that and want to, you know, maybe bridge and do like more complex, you know, staking systems, but are interested in Bitcoin security that want to use these kinds of assets.
So what kind of protocols are interested in using Bitcoin security? And I guess this is maybe a good segue into, you know, ecosystem and applications that are being built currently on Symbiotic. Like what kind of trends are you seeing there, and what trends are you seeing in terms of asset alignment?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, right? I think we do have a few use cases that are more like Ethereum centric, where it's around like, you know, extending the capabilities of the proposer of Ethereum or the block builders, and like, or making them add economic security or credible commitments to their blocks and what's going to be in them, which is like sort of this pre-confirmation paradigm where you can essentially allow people to basically say, you know, I'm going to include this transaction. If not, you can slash me and things like this. So there's definitely like a bunch of systems like that in Symbiotic. There's also a lot of cross-chain interoperabilities, or just this generalized infrastructure that in crypto is getting there and being used for everything, right? Like, I guess Interop, oracles, automation keepers, all these systems are also being built on Symbiotic, maybe with like additional twists in terms of how they target their user, like the rollup that they're targeting, or the application specific chain, or, you know, in terms of like what kind of stake they're taking in. And I think, you know, overall, right, we have a big resurgence in terms of Bitcoin and using Bitcoin in DeFi, and a lot of the teams are interested in that and want to maybe also attract just the Bitcoin community to their project, and doing that by enabling Bitcoin staking, and also Bitcoin as an asset that's just relatively cheap in terms of paying for, like, the additional yield you have to pay to get it to secure something is thought to be lower, right? So a lot of teams are interested in that. And then I think, you know, what's worth highlighting, I guess, there's also new use cases that Symbiotic flexible architecture can be used for, that goes beyond, you know, pure proof of stake or securing like a network of nodes, but rather basically goes in a direction of maybe insurance, or you know, providing collateral for margin trading, or for securing certain parts of like a DeFi protocol, where because the collateral is already in our vaults and the way it's designed, like you can essentially use the slashing mechanism to redirect funds should there a certain event have been triggered on chain. Let's say in a case of a lending market, if there's like bad debt that has been accrued, you can use like sort of the Symbiotic vault architecture to trigger like this insurance event, and then, you know, like the restake capital would be slashed to pay back the borrowers that suffered from this bad debt incident. So that's like one way where we can like actually extend the way the capital is used, and make it like even more capital efficient for the people that want to use that collateral, because it's been used in so many different facets. So this is like a direction that is interesting. It's also interesting because I think it does open up like more risk for people that stake. So in some ways, if you do these products and like people stake towards those, they are taking on more risk, different than like proof of stake, where basically it's kind of like a very low risk activity generally, right? The amount of slashings overall have been like, very low, like 0.001% probably of all blocks have slashing. So here, you move differently on that like sort of risk reward curve for the underlying collateral. And, that users need to be aware of. Like currently there's not much there. And I expect, in the future, there will be different vaults that take on different like trade-offs there, where one of them is like only doing low risk staking activities to proof of stake networks, and others are more high risk, protecting a lot of insurance events and stuff like that. And the depositors ultimately self-select where they want to sit there on the risk curve.
Very cool. Yeah. So you talked about like new use cases that Symbiotic enables. So insurance could be one of them. Are there any other use cases that you're bullish on, like perhaps even use cases that fall outside of crypto, where we could use restaking primitives to secure some other type of application that is not native to crypto?
Yeah, in that path, I think it's pre-crypto. I guess it's like at the heart of crypto. It's but I guess the assets that can be used potentially as security can actually be outside of crypto. So like RWAs are an example where potentially that could be also come an asset class that can contribute within the system. One of the challenges is always like, what happens when you want to slash these assets? Of course, if they're like very centralized control, like the issuers of these assets are centralized entities, then there needs to be some interaction with them, because you cannot really unwrap and burn the underlying asset. So there needs to be like a different path of this. Essentially, like, also Symbiotic kind of leaves it open to the user of the consumer of the security, what it actually means to slash. Like, it can be just the tokens are redistributed to some other address that like a governance treasury or something, so they wouldn't actually be burned, for example. So like in a case of an RWA asset, maybe that's better than trying to like burn down the underlying house or something. Obviously, like you like ETH or something that really can be natively in the system in a decentralized way be slashed, that's gonna have like different kind of security characteristics than like a super centralized asset.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about RWAs. Do you think that makes sense for RWAs to secure? I mean, I guess this kind of comes into the financialization of staking conversation, which is something I also want to talk about. But like, what do you think is the role of RWAs? So whether that's untangible assets like US dollars or bonds, or more tangible assets like real estate. What do you think is the role there?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I guess the goal of our crypto financial system that we're building is to like have these processes and these things be hosted on chain. And I think restaking, or I guess generally DeFi, like if they're integrated in these protocols, that brings more of a like sort of incentive for these assets to actually move on chain. So like, the first RWAs or the first stable coins that, access this additional yield from these systems can probably bootstrap more or like accelerate the process of bringing all these things on chain. Because otherwise, if you just earn 5% yield on your RWA on your TradFi account, or you earn that 5% in DeFi, it doesn't really matter, right? But if you can use that asset in DeFi somehow and like get additional yields from additional risk exposure too, but then that makes it attractive and probably brings more people onto the chain, and then ultimately like kind of moves the entire system on chain. So I think that's kind of like the initial catalyst, let's say. But then in the long run, I guess it's a bit hard to tell. It really depends how intertwined sort of the real world becomes with the crypto system, and how they can how these systems like actually work. Or is there still just a centralized issuer that just can deny what happened on chain maybe and rug everyone? That obviously isn't the design that, like, I guess these systems are still very early for me to judge like how that can work.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is like I separate the asset from the infrastructure. So we have assets, and those assets, most of the world's assets exist on traditional finance rails, as we call them. And then you have crypto finance rails that have birthed a whole new category of assets, sort of with Bitcoin being the main one, and then a number of other assets that have come after it. And our goal as an industry should be to try to move the assets that exist on crypto rails, on traditional finance rails, onto crypto rails. So in the same way that before e-commerce, we still had commerce and we still had goods and services being traded. Then e-commerce came along, the internet came along, and now we have goods and services being traded on the internet. Now, where it gets interesting is the use case, the new types of use cases that enables. So before the internet, we couldn't have things like Deliveroo or Uber or Amazon. But now that we have this new infrastructure, that enables this new type of commerce, right, of product or service. And that's where I think crypto becomes interesting is, okay, like what does it mean when you start issuing, when the US government or the Fed starts issuing bonds directly on chain? What does it mean when most of the world's currency is traded on chain in the form of stable coins? What does it mean when land registries are native and real estate registries are natively on chain? And there isn't this kind of middle layer, right, where you have some paper version, right, like some TradFi version that is wrapped up as a derivative on chain. And I think that that's where we get real innovation. That's where we're gonna get real sort of net new use cases and net new applications when those traditional finance applications or assets that currently on TradFi rails start being natively on a crypto rails.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think, I guess the first wave was always more about like, or maybe it's still like that, right? Where you kind of mirror the asset that's like kind of in the TradFi rails, but you also sort of put it on chain. And I guess like it's moving more on the spectrum to like, okay, it's actually, directly issued mostly on chain and there's no digital twin or whatever, like there's all these words that have been used in the past. But yeah, I guess that's going to be like a process still. But yeah, excited to see like some of I guess this whole narrative is definitely coming back and there's like a lot of like teams working on that, like Ondo, right? Plume. Actually, we're going to work with Plume a bit. All these other teams, Mantra, I think that's a huge one as well, right? So definitely the interest is there for.
Yeah, but as far as I can tell, as far as I know, right, like things like Plume and Mantra and Ondo are still operating in this creating the digital twin aspect, like, and so that I think that it's natural, it's normal for the industry to kickstart the RWA transition this way. And I think if you look back at how the internet and e-commerce and so the early days of internet commerce started evolving, it was very much like this, right? Like e-commerce was kind of slapped on top of like existing logistics networks, et cetera, that were more catered towards like mail-in or phone-in orders. Like I remember this, right? Like in the mid 2010s. And at some point, the entire logistics chain started becoming really purpose-built for internet commerce. And I think that when that transition happens, we're going to start to see real innovation in crypto and new types of products that we've never seen before, and new types of opportunities that have never existed before. Now, what those are is yet to be seen, but like that's where we get the real.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about the vault system a little bit, and like what's unique about Symbiotic's vault system, and can you talk a little bit about some of the partners that you're working with?
Yeah, I think definitely like on the vault side, it's kind of this core primitive, I would say, that we use to have these multi-asset staking and to have people build their custom staking or restaking systems. And you do that basically by like each vault can have one collateral type and has like basically its own slashing rules and its own like sort of delegation strategy, where like that means like you can use that asset in the vault to stake to multiple networks if those networks accept your stake, your restaked stake. So like let's say you have $100 million in the vault, basically say to the network, hey, I can bring these 100 million in security to your network. I would delegate to these operators. Like, are you fine with that? Like, do you accept my vault essentially? And then the network says yes. And So you might like add up like 3, 4, 5, depends, right? It sort of depends on the vault's work there. So everything's opt-in Symbiotic. And from the network perspective, again, you can sort of decide which vaults to work with. So you might have like your own vault that's like kind of a foundation staking vault that has your own token. And then you accept like some extra security from some other vault that's run by these curators, we call them. So basically like a vault curator can be like a risk manager or like an LRT platform, like an EtherFi. And then, they start to also contribute stake to your network. And like the interesting thing here is that because like all these have like custom setups, and you can also within your network. So basically there's this network middleware that like basically the team, that's the project that's trying to use staking develops, that can also customly reward or customly slash vaults, right? So you could, for example, build like a more complex system where, one type of vault gets more of the yields or more of the rewards that the network generates, but also takes on more of the slashing risks or, other like sort of tranched and financialized sort of staking systems, all with the goal of essentially making it possible for you to build a staking system that suits your, whatever the goal of your network is, right? And especially also trying to do it in a way that's, you can exchange the vaults, right? You can change and adapt the system over time according to the life cycle of your network. So let's say you're a very new network, right? You maybe don't even have a token yet. You want to bootstrap your security. You're using like ETH as a secured asset. And then when you get like your own token, you start to swap in your own vault that uses staking of your own token and so on, right? So basically the system should like allow you to build a staking system that can last forever and doesn't need you to like, you can adapt it like as you go by like sort of swapping out these vaults, and should basically be future proof and sort of support any kind of staking design that you might have in mind.
And as a capital allocator, how should one be thinking about where they're allocating their stake, and what are some of the consideration that one should keep in mind when staking with any one of these vaults?
Yeah, right. Like, so yeah, I guess it's kind of like risk rewards question. These vaults, depending on how many active delegations they have, they will receive more rewards. Like currently, like many of the rewards are just kind of like points based, but ultimately, right, there should be some fee generating elements to that. And on the other hand, you have kind of the additional risk that you take on from slashing. So there will be different trade-offs, and they can be very variable, let's say. Like I think right now the system is in a very early days. Like actually most of the networks that are there, like the 14 that we launched to Mainnet with, some of them just have staking designs, but they don't have it activated yet. There's only like a handful, like PrimeF, I think, is the one that has it fully integrated. And also the discoverability of some of these risks is like still getting better and better, right? So that you can actually also, I assume over time, there will be more tooling. We will also like invest in that and build out a bunch of this to make it easier to like see, what kind of risks is this exposed to this vault, the history of slashings and, how also the reward element of that. Like currently, if you look at the Symbiotic app or the front end, you mostly kind of see like the points you earned and, where the stake is, how it's related to which operators. Over time, there's already like a few other dashboards. I think one from Inception LRT that also shows like some similar information. But, I guess over time, these will develop, and then you will really have like, I guess the idea is that differentiated vaults that have like different risk reward trade-offs.
Got it. So yeah, let's talk about the mainnet launch a little bit. You guys launched in just about a month ago. It was a huge milestone. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the metrics, like what's the TVL, how many networks or partners are currently involved with mainnet? Now, this will probably go out, we're recording this on February 20th. This might go out in a couple of weeks because we have a pretty packed lineup of episodes, but hopefully that I think by the time this goes up, maybe some of this information will be a little bit stale. But tell us a bit about the launch and why you're excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hopefully all numbers will have gone up at that point. But yeah, I mean, like, I guess a core part is we roll out the core contracts, like with full slashing functionality and the vault system that I talked about, and the initial networks that integrate the full Symbiotic system to secure themselves. And, there's 14 partners there that like use the Symbiotic security on the demand side. Initially, we already had this deposits contract live since June, where, like some of the TVL was basically pre-deposited. So there's been like a lot of like ETH, ST-ETH, and other ETH derivative assets, like stake derivative assets, and some Bitcoin assets, and some other core partner assets of teams that are planning to integrate or in the process of integrating Symbiotic and consuming that security. And on the other side, you have the vaults that are now hosting the stake. So basically, there's like a migration period from this pre-deposit vaults, we call them, to the now actively delegating vaults controlled by LRT providers or independent risk curators like Gauntlet, or node operators like Chorus One, like Figment, like Kiln. They essentially can set up these vaults and attract stake to then delegate on these networks or restake across those networks. And, right now we have, I think, close to 100 vaults there with various amounts of stake in them. So basically you decide on one vault with your TVL and they delegate it. There's probably like 10 or 20 that have like significant amounts of stake. Currently, I think it's around 400 million. So it's like about a fourth or a quarter or 30% of the entire stake that's already been migrated, partially also from the LRTs who were depositing through these wrapper contracts. So like end users of LRTs kind of have this process automated. If you're like directly depositing in Symbiotic, you need to do this like manually. And yeah, those delegate across like also, I think, almost 100 different operators that are registered in the Symbiotic system. So basically operators register once in the Symbiotic protocol, and then they opt in with their entity to different networks, and they can take stake from different vaults. So the nice thing, I guess, kind of worth mentioning, is that you essentially only have one operator, like master entity, and then for each network you sort of opt in, and you can take on stake from many different vaults from different partners, and have different settings, I guess, for each of the partners, which for the node operator makes it like a much more scalable system. If there were like a lot of different networks, which we are already seeing, right? We already have 14. And our goal is to like basically host an entire decentralized networks that are in the existence. So if that all runs through the system, then like it's much more scalable than for an operator to have to set up like special operators for each partner they have, and all these things, attract new stake and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the current state. And yeah, we're working on many new like partners, completing the integrations for some of the existing launch partners. Like, there's external points or rewards coming from many of them. The slashings or like slashing systems are being rolled out in stages. So depending on the partner, that will take different amount of time. But yeah, that's where we're currently at. And yeah, very excited.
What are you most excited about in the next like 6 months to a year, like in terms of partnerships, integrations, and projects building on Symbiotic?
Yeah, good question. I think we're really excited to play our part in this, I guess, aggregation, let's call it, or bringing back together the unifying this system that we created that was got very fragmented, right? Like especially in Ethereum with like many L2s and many different stacks. And I think, Symbiotic can play a key role in economically aligning the security and sort of those different systems. And so that's what I'm excited about. I think there's like, a few things in the L2 space where we're already seeing some teams like Manta using Symbiotic for fast finality. And then we hope that like, on their chain, like they can also use other Symbiotic networks and then secure them with the same stake. So for example, Manta could use like interoperability from a project building on Symbiotic, like a hyperlane, and secure that with their own assets as well. So those things are the main ones. And then I think also like the exotic use cases, I think, or the non-POS use cases that we sort of touched upon, I think are very interesting. There's a team, Cap Labs, that is building like a stable coin essentially, which uses restake collateral as like kind of a mechanism to hold accountable the people that generate yield for the stable coin. It's a bit of a more complex system, probably worth checking out. And those insurance use cases that I was talking about, I think they will play a major role in the longer run, and we're excited to see how people use like the flexible primitives that Symbiotic Core protocol provides.
So what's the end game for Symbiotic and for restaking in general? Like, where do you see this going in the next 10 years? You know, if we look really far out.
Yeah, I think the end game is that sort of all decentralized networks or on-chain systems use Symbiotic to hold accountable the actors in the system and to automate like some of the penalization and reward systems that these systems need. Today, we're very focused on the proof of stake part of it, and some early signs of success are there. But, you know, the end game would be that, you know, any type of like collateral use case is covered. Basically, you achieve capital efficiency through that because it's all built on the same kind of vault principles, and the risk sharing can work very well if it reaches scale. I think that's, yeah.
And like, what do you think of this? How do you address these concerns that restaking ends up just really centralizing a lot of the applications that rely on Ethereum security? So like Vitalik's talked about this, and there's been a number of people kind of sounding the alarm that restaking and liquid staking generally ends up being just a centralizing force. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's actually like the opposite, right? Actually, liquid staking has contributed in decentralizing Ethereum more than if it weren't there, especially, right? Like without Lido, definitely Ethereum would be more centralized because it would just be controlled by big custodial entities. And it already is, honestly. Like, you know, recent discussion, I think like Coinbase runs like 20% of all of Ethereum validation, right? So I think this trend would be much more pronounced if there weren't like a adequate, like sort of decentralized solution that liquid staking provides. Yeah, restaking is more or less just an extension of that, trying to bring extra primitives to make like building something fully on chain actually like also economically feasible. And in the wake of that, like kind of try to give more power, equal access to different partner parties that can participate in the system, because, you know, it's open source, it's like a protocol on chain. So like anyone can be an operator. There's no like necessarily like whitelist or off-chain agreement you have to do to take part. Of course, like some of the core dynamics of capitalism in some ways still exist, and they are centralizing, but, you know, I think less so than a fully off-chain, on-chain mixed system, right? Like a exchange that generally can achieve a lot more than a fully on-chain system, right? By managing liquidity off-chain, by just controlling partners more and stuff like that. So I think that's sort of my take here.
Do you think in the future applications will continue to require stake in order to be secure, that applications will be so far abstracted away from the underlying security that maybe they just make away with it altogether?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very deep question. I think there's like obviously also advances in like ZK technology, which kind of like makes things provable on chain and maybe lowers the need for stake or secure. But then again, you know, who generates the proof? They actually probably should be somewhat staked and held accountable if they don't create the proofs and stuff like that. So I think there's always like some angle. But yeah, also in the long run, I guess, you know, if you have all these operator entities like sort of identified on chain, there's also like a reputation element there where you can kind of see how they've performed in other networks and probably use some of that as well in addition to the stake. But I guess it will never fully go away, because if it's probably just a reputation, then maybe, yeah, I guess someone could have used it.
Or maybe regulation. I mean, it could be also that they're regulated.
Yeah, right. That, I guess, yeah, it depends how this system will shape, how much it will actually impact core like human coordination mechanisms like nation states and stuff like that. I guess I don't know. That's very hard to foresee right now.
Yeah, well, it's super interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing the future of Symbiotic as things continue to evolve. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been great chatting, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seb, and yeah, good to see you.